I'm Mo Rocca, and I'm excited to announce Season 4 of my podcast, Mobituaries. I've got a whole new bunch of stories to share with you about the most fascinating people and things who are no longer with us. From famous figures who died on the very same day, to the things I wish would die, like buffets. All that and much more. Listen to Mobituaries with Mo Rocca wherever you get your podcasts.
First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos. But it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, or identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, how are you this evening? We're recording in the evening just before I don't know, what do we call it? Broadcast? Drop? Land?
Well, we're too old to know the correct terminology, I suspect.
I have to say, Kieran, you're looking, it's nice to see you back in your little man cave studio type thing, but the lighting you've got, Kieran, is it's rather sultry. As a bulb gone, as my dad would say.
Well, like everybody else, it's 7 or 8 days before payday, and I'm skinned, so I'm keeping the bulbs to a minimum.
Oh, so poor old Baroness having to cut. Just the 2 straws in the cocktails tonight, is it, for the Baroness? It's Newsday, Kieran, or the evening before Newsday. Let's be fair so people don't get confused. But as people listen to this, it's Newsday. And our first story, Kieran, I got some kickback. I got some poking, some prodding from our last pod because we had a story about John Textor possibly being interested in selling his stake in Crystal Palace, and I said I think we should hold this over because I've heard some rumours and that stuff might be happening, and lo and behold, on various WhatsApp groups and various text messages I got from Palace fans I know saying, "What do you know that we don't? Is it about the manager? Was it about?" And I got as many people going, "You're a bullshit merchant. You're trying to get people to listen to the pod. You know nothing." But it turns out Uncle Kevin, every now and again, through accident or design, his ear to the ground does pick up some actual drum beats. And it turns out that it's reported, the Mail in particular carried this story, that Palace are in talks with the Raine Group. Now, I like you, Kieran, perhaps you could remind our listeners who the Raine Group are, and I'd be interested in your opinion as to whether or not this is yet another example of a fractured ownership structure, or whether this is a rare indication of some financial foresight on behalf of the people that run Palace.
Right. The Raine Group are a banking stroke advisory organisation. They assisted Roman Abramovich in respect of the sale of Chelsea to the Todd Boehly Group for a fee which I think was certainly at the top end of expectations. They also advised the Glazer family in relation to the 25% sale to Sir Jim Ratcliffe. And on the back of that, they trousered a not inconsiderable £31.5 million for the privilege of finding somebody who was interested in buying Manchester United. That's a tricky task, as we all agree. So the story that's come through the Mail, this has come from Matt Hughes, I believe, is that they have been tasked by Crystal Palace with the aim of trying to find some funding in respect of the new stand. So Palace, wanting to extend the capacity of Selhurst to, you know this far better than I do, but I'd imagine sort of mid 30s,
34,000
in terms of capacity.
Yeah, from 26, yeah.
Yep. And I would imagine that a significant element of that would be for want of a better phrase, for the prawn sandwich brigade, because as we've established, it's all very well building new stadiums. If you've got fans who are paying £700-800 a season for a ticket, you're not actually getting your money back. So you need to have the facilities to attract the corporate fans and hospitality and so on. The cost of the new stand has risen significantly since it was first mooted. It's not a criticism of Palace. Construction costs have gone up significantly, on the back of Ukraine. Steel prices are up, labour costs are up, general overheads are up as well. So I think the initial estimated fee of 105 million has gone up by 45. Where's that money going to come from? So this is where the name of the Raine Group has been brought into the equation. Now, in addition to that, we do have John Textor, the former skateboarder and now multi-club owner of football teams. I think it's fair to say he's not very popular. His Brazilian team, I think, managed to somehow throw away a 14-point lead. Is it Botafogo? Or something like that?
Botafogo, yeah.
Botafogo. And then at the weekend, he owns 80% of RWD Molenbeek in Belgium, and the match there was abandoned when fans decided that they were not happy with the level of performance, which has been, I think, the polite word is erratic, and they threw firecrackers on the pitch, and the match ended up being abandoned, and the club had a €50,000 fine. But this is indicative of a broader issue: is does he actually know what he's doing? Which has been questioned, and we're not here. This isn't the nature of the show to look at somebody's decision making process, but we've always said it's an important one, and there is a concern that with some of the new breed of investors, they understand investment, they don't understand football, and perhaps a unique skill set and knowledge set is required. So, could he be looking to divest of his shares in Palace using the raising of funds to extend the stadium as a bit of a smokescreen? Well, the answer is yes. Clearly, I think the relationship with Steve Parish isn't great from what we're hearing. Steve Parish owns a small proportion of the shares, but because of the voting structure, he's a much more significant share of the votes. And Textor is sort of being moaning and grumbling, and you've hinted at this in the past. So that's where we are at present. From the people I talk to, if I say to them, "Are Palace in play?" for want of a better phrase, from an M&A point of view, I get the standard answer: everybody's up for sale if the price is right. But Palace are probably more up for sale than some other clubs.
Well, that's the complication, because it seems that Steve Parish isn't up for sale, that he's the one who's most reluctant to divest his share of the club. The issue with John Textor for Palace fans and for people who follow football finance is it seems of the multi-club organisation he is part of, it seems that Lyon, who he owns outright, are the club he sees as his alpha club, for want of a better word. There's talk of him trying to attract Karim Benzema to Lyon, and of course Palace fans wondered about then his financial commitment to Palace if he's spending a lot of money. We know there are talks of investigation by French authorities around him. The original story we were supposed to talk about on Sunday was talk about him selling off his Palace shares, but the difficulty of selling only 40% of the club. But what I find interesting about this Raine Group story, because it wasn't quite the story that I'd heard, because I'd heard they were potentially looking for buyers. But the story that the Mail says is that this is simply an attempt to raise the money to build the stand. It took 6 years to get all the planning permissions, all the legal stuff. stuff around Sainsbury's, stuff around local residents, stuff around the car park. It took years to get that sorted out. And as you say, in that time, the cost of the newsstand has gone up by 45 to 50%. So apparently, we're only looking for new investors to build that. Most Palace fans look at the amount of money that the owners are worth and think, well, the money they're talking about, they have already. So it seems odd that they're going to the Raine Group just to raise a bit of building money, especially when John Textor, when he originally came in, it was specified that John Textor's only investment was going to be in infrastructure. He wasn't going to take part in investing in a team. It was only going to be, essentially, he was coming in to build the newsstand. We'd have 5 years of 10,000 extra people eating prawn sandwiches. He'd cash in off the back of that. So it seems to a lot of Palace fans that this is a sledgehammer to crack a nut. If we're going to the Raine Group just to raise a bit of extra money to build a stand, that seems a bit odd.
It does, and this is going to sound really sniffy. Why would the Raine Group get involved in a £45 million fundraising deal when they charged 31 million in respect of the Manchester United deal? It's. I'm not saying it's beneath them, but there are certain organisations that, just as if you talk to certain supermodels, they say, "Well, I don't get out of bed for less than £10,000." Well, the Raine Group, they don't get out of their corporate bed. How much is their commission going to be on a £45 million or $45 million, whatever it's going to be, fundraiser? That to me seems very strange, especially to go around hawking. Well, exactly what are they hawking? It's not the opportunity to acquire Palace, because it does look as if Steve Parish is acting as the blocker here. I suspect there's more to this than meets the eye.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because you do wonder what investment opportunities there are for whatever huge investment company the Raine Group attract to, building a few new boxes at Sellers Park. You were right, by the way. It did sound sniffy, but well done. I shall look for an attempt to denigrate Brighton and Hove Albion at some stage in the near future. Kieran, it'll probably have the word quinoa in it. Secondly, apart from the Baroness, how many supermodels have you spoken to on any kind of basis?
In Moscow, one or two.
Oh, of course.
In the UK, zero.
Yeah. I spoke to Kate Moss once, but I doubt she has any memories of the conversation. It was very brief and pretty much one way, and it was late at night. Let's leave it at that. Derby County, it's amazing. There will be Derby fans who see their name on your mind map of potential subjects, and some of them will be quite pleased. The old nostalgia will kick in, and it will be like the days when we spoke about nothing but Derby County. There's some news on their financial figures since coming out of administration.
That's right. I mean, Derby have not published any financial information themselves since 2018. And it's in 2024. And the reason for that is that Mel Morris and Stephen Pearce, they used the EFL investigation, and then they used COVID as a smokescreen to not be transparent, which I think was very disappointing. The club is now owned by David Clowes, and everybody I speak to has nothing but very high praise for the fact that he effectively overpaid for the club, taking it out of administration. But he did that because he's a decent guy. He wanted to ensure that the unsecured creditors did get at least their 25% back, and fair play to him, because I think Derby were reaching the end of the administration, and it could have gone one of two ways. So he's done a fantastic job, and that has come at a cost. His property company, which is very successful, produced its financial results, and sort of hidden away in the small print was the fact that Derby were now part of the group for 9 months. The money coming into the club, very impressive for a League One club, £16.5 million, and they didn't have a sponsorship deal for part of that time. So, that's testament to the Derby fans who've been filling out Pride Park since then. The concern, and it's not a big concern, is that they were losing around about 700 grand a month, 750 grand a month. As a startup, you could argue that part of that would be to the fact that he effectively inherited a football club with 4 players, and they've had to accelerate since then. Where it leaves Mel Morris, I'm hearing a variety of stories, but I've heard some sources which I would say are very reliable that he's lost in excess of £200 million. But that was the approach that he took, and I'm not saying, I'm not certainly not one of his fans, but it looks as if he sold the property company or the company which was set up which owned Pride Park. He effectively sold Pride Park for £1, or he sold that company for £1. And he said to David Clowes, look, there's a £22 million loan there. You settle the loan, and you will have the stadium, which was valued at 81 million. So that appears to be his parting gift as far as Derby was concerned. And nothing's been heard of him since then. If you Google Mel Morris, he used to be fairly high profile when he was the owner of Derby. He's gone very much underground since then.
So basically, you can sum that up as the good news for Derby fans who would have been anxious seeing their name on the list of contents, is that they've gone back to losing the sort of money that every other club loses on a weekly level in the Championship of League One.
Yeah. I mean, by the average losses in League One are around about 700 or 800 grand a year. So to lose 6.8 million is significant. But I do think that there are extenuating circumstances in respect of Derby, and I don't think Mel Morris was ever a Derby fan. I think Mel Morris was always a Mel Morris fan who just happened to use Derby County as a vehicle to stroke his ego. David Clowes is the opposite. He's very low profile, but by all accounts, he's been Derby through and through. And I've speaking to a lot of people locally there, and they are full of praise that he is the real deal. And also, again, I can't name the people, senior people in football have spoken very highly of him as well, in terms of the very professional way that he's conducted himself and the way that he's dealt with the EFL and so on.
Yeah. Remind me, Kieran, the way Guy originally phrased this question in the script was that Derby have lost 6.8 million on turnover of 16.5. For some reason, I cannot keep the definition of turnover in my... I know one of the reasons is drinking a bottle of wine during the pod. I accept that. But for some reason, turnover is... I've got amortisation. I think I've pretty much got that nailed in. But turnover is one of those things that business people always use. And I always... Because turnover is not profit, is it?
No, turnover's... I don't know why they use the word turnover. Turnover's revenue. It's the money generated from ticket sales, the TV deal, and the commercial deal. Right. So it's your top line number before you start to deduct the expenses of the club, which will give you a profit or a loss.
Right. Now, we've talked a lot, Kieran, since this pod began about Blackburn Rovers, mainly in a sort of baffled turn as to why the Venkies are still involved. There's never been a stage since the pod started when we've gone, Blackburn are in trouble. But they just crop up from time to time because it seems to be a strange ownership model. But it seems this week that a judge in the Venkies' home country will be having a major say in the finances of Blackburn. Yes.
It has. We have been a bit flippant, I would say, with regards to the Venkies. And, I do have a secret rover who has been very beneficial to the show in giving me some of the inside track. And that again, we sort of woven that into stories. The Venkies have been very generous and benevolent owners, which is astounding, since they've not attended a match since January 2013. We're talking 11 years. Wow. And I think the reason for this is in January 2013, a rather grumpy Rovers fan lobbed a snowball at one of the Venkies in the director's box, and they said, "Well, what is this nonsense? Away with you! We're not going to attend any matches." But since then, again, according to my secret rover, every time the club has needed money to pay for a player, if there's been a gap in the wage bill that needed funding, if there was a particular expense, They just phone them up, and you get a conversation, and 24 hours later, there's a bank transfer. Things back in India have, however, deteriorated. We know that there were some issues probably 6 months ago with regards to some properties owned by the Venkis and potential tax issues. The Modi government in India, which, like sadly many places which you sort of regarded as historically being democratic, is becoming increasingly authoritarian in nature. And one of the ways that it deals with that is that it tries to stop its citizens from transferring money overseas. Now, what the Venkis have done is effectively to the thick end of £20 million a year on many an occasion, is that they have provided money going out of India and into the UK. They now have a specific law which has been introduced in India, and the only way that the Venkis can get money across to Rovers is if they get emergency permission from the government. Do they need emergency permission? Well, if this story is true, then they do, and they need it fairly quickly, because HMRC haven't been paid. There's allegations of an outstanding £26 million tax bill, and if HMRC don't get their way, and we've seen this with other clubs. Again, it became a bit of a standing. I'd say it was a standing joke, but it was never funny in relation to Ron Martin and HMRC in Southend, in that he would always avoid paying tax, and then they'd issue a winding up order, and then, as if by magic, he'd find the money at 11:59 p.m. I think this could become more complicated in respect of Rovers, and that's why I'm quite concerned, because if the government doesn't give permission, then there's going to be an issue. I think the Venkis advisors are going to the Indian government and saying, look, we've put in 200 million quid into Rovers from a point of view of saving face, but also saving our investment. You've got to give permission. And now some bureaucrat is going to go away and assess the evidence and perhaps give them permission or not. If it doesn't give permission, we've got a problem.
I owe Blackburn Rovers fans an apology, Kieran, because I assumed this was going to have another flippant outcome. But that's a worrying story, but it also indicates something that you've spoken about since the very first week of the pod in terms of ownership models, that sometimes when you have a benevolent dictatorship, for want of a better word, where the money is on tap and for many, many years is on tap, and then suddenly, for whatever reason, and sometimes it's out with the control of the actual owners themselves, the tap is dried up. Then you suddenly, out of nowhere, have a problem because you've become complacent. You've just expected money to be paid. So there will be somebody at Blackburn who's been thinking to themselves, well, we have got this tax bill outstanding, but it doesn't matter because we'll just give the Venkis a call and it will be resolved.
Yeah, I mean, Rovers have used the Venkis as the bank of mum and dad, and that's fine until either circumstances change, and we saw that in the case of Chelsea and Roman Abramovich, or the attitude of the owners change, as we saw with Derby and Mel Morris. When he got bored, he just decided to put the club into administration, and that's always a risk, and that's a risk at any club which is reliant upon owner funding for a significant period of time.
You can't imagine, though, Kieran, if the worst came to the worst, that a traditional club like Blackburn in the heartland of historical English football wouldn't be an attractive proposition for another buyer, would it?
If the price is right, then there's always a potential buyer. But at the same time, Blackburn is surrounded by other clubs, in Lancashire, so it has a limited demographic spread. It's been losing money hand over fist year in, year out. Without the Venkis, I think it would have struggled in the Championship to be competitive. And whilst I don't see nobody I don't see a problem in terms of finding a new owner. You're going to have to work reasonably hard to persuade somebody. It's not how much it's going to cost you to buy the club. Your problems start once the club is bought. And we've said that. I spoke to one owner, and I know it's glib. It's a bit like owning a racehorse. The two best days are the day you buy it and the day you sell it.
Yeah, I hope this story resolves it. I've had some quite rough nights in Blackburn as well. One playoff night in particular, when the train got ambushed on the way home, was rather hairy. But I've had some really nice times in Blackburn, I have to say. Although I also have to say that thanks to the Beatles, I was rather disappointed by the number of holes in Blackburn, Lancashire, the first time I went there, as we were expecting many more holes than there actually were. That's what happens when you grow up living your life and getting your geographical knowledge from a pop band.
All right, everybody's ready to go? Yeah. Just 12 hours between mommy and a margarita. Oh, you gotta be. Don't let a stuffy nose block your good time. Children's Afrin provides 12-hour all-day or all-night relief of nasal congestion from colds or allergies. Afrin, the wow is real. Use as directed.
Why is it that with sparkling water, I'm always playing guessing games with what flavor I'm drinking? Is it citrus? Is it aluminum can flavored? Not sure. Sparkling ice, though, they really mean flavor. Like in-your-face flavor. Orange mango, black raspberry. Don't even get me started on the strawberry lemonade. Kiwi Strawberry slid right into my taste buds DMs last night and let them know who's boss. No subtleties there, and no sugar either. But it does have vitamins and antioxidants. Find sparkling ice at a major grocery store or club retailer near you. Sparkling ice. Anything but subtle.
Two big clubs, traditionally big clubs, have put out their latest accounts. Kieran, Middlesbrough first and then Notts County.
Yes, we have seen quite a few clubs from the EFL Championship last season put out their results. I'm sure this is just an amazing coincidence that it was a couple of days after the Richard Masters car crash in front of Parliament, where he was trying to justify the Premier League delaying and then reducing and then trying to extinguish their financial commitments or obligations or whatever you want to do in terms of the so-called New Deal with clubs in the EFL. So Middlesbrough lost 550 grand a week in 22-23. They offset that to a certain extent because they sold Jed Spence to Spurs, they sold Tavernier, I think, to Bournemouth. So it did reduce the losses, but they still lost a significant amount of money. And up pops, once again, Mel Morris. Because looking at the small print of the Middlesbrough accounts, there is reference to a compensation payment of £2.7 million. Now, when Derby County made the playoffs, and I think this was 2019 or 2020, they made the playoffs ahead of Middlesbrough. And Middlesbrough took the view that Derby would not have achieved that position in the table had it not been for manipulating financial fair play, and therefore they because the EFL was not prepared to charge Derby with a breach of FFP as such, Derby were on the receipt of a lawsuit from Middlesbrough Football Club, and that lawsuit was served to the administrators. And this was one of the issues we discussed. Whilst Derby were in administration, does any potential new buyer want to pick up the risk of having to do a payout to Derby? And again, I've been very critical of certain aspects of Mel Morris's behaviour. He came to a private agreement with the Middlesbrough owner, Steve Gibson, and he said he would personally pay the compensation in respect of whatever could be agreed. So £2.7 million is the final degree of settlement. People say, well, that seems quite low in respect of what you could potentially earn in the Premier League. But yeah, I put the numbers into a spreadsheet and I say, well, hold on, if Middlesbrough had finished sixth in the Championship, that puts them into the playoffs. That's not the same as promotion. And if you look historically, the club that finishes sixth probably is about an 18 or 19% chance of going up. Yes, you're going to get an extra £100 million in terms of income, but also your wage bill is going to go up, your operating costs are going to go up. So, you're probably looking at a profit of £20 million. You multiply that by 16 to 18%, you're probably looking, that comes at around about £3 million, and that's where we got this figure of 2.7. You knock off a bit for it's cheaper, as our friend Nick DeMarco says. It's always cheaper to negotiate a settlement than to litigate. So that's, I think, how they would have worked out that sum of money. And Mel Morris kept to his word that he would settle with Middlesbrough privately, rather than putting it through the administration, and that would alleviate and take out one particular issue in terms of the complications of selling Derby whilst it was under the hands of Quantumar, the administrators.
Steve Gibson must be the longest serving owner in the Championship by a factor of many, many years, is he not?
He's been around, I think, since late 80s.
Yeah.
He's a proper fan.
Yeah.
And he's in for a total of £239 million. And his reward for that was getting promoted in 2016 and 1 year in the Premier League. And there's lots of people such as Steve. The Venkis have done it. Mel Morris did it to us effectively at Derby. We've got the Hemmings family at Preston. We've got, I think, Hargreaves at, or was it Steve Lansdowne at Bristol City? And you look at the financial commitment which is coming from these people, and it makes no logical sense. But then football's not a logical industry.
No. And yet, amazingly, Steve Gibson doesn't look that much older now than he did 30 years ago. I dread to think what the portrait in his attic must look like. I dread to think. Another old traditional team, Kieran, Notts County, their latest accounts are out as well.
Yes, they were promoted from the National League last season. And what we're seeing is that it's becoming an expensive business getting promoted. They lost £2.8 million. Yeah, that's 55 grand a week for a club in the fifth tier of English football. And based on my figures, the figures I'm sort of putting into the spreadsheets, you're now more like you're likely to lose more money in the National League than you are in League Two, and probably on average you're probably losing the amounts equivalent to a League One club, and that's for a league where one club goes up automatically, and you've got these playoffs for positions for the second place to go up. And if you talk to people at Sutton and Harrogate, what's it like in League Two? They go, the first couple of months is okay, the excitement, and then it's not quite as much fun. A season or two later.
Yeah, Sutton will discuss this, I'm sure, at the end of the season. Sutton have got that terrible dilemma if they do go down, what do they do with the pitch? This next story, Kieran, it's almost like a misprint. As you can hear, it actually made me cough in surprise, because it seems here, Kieran, that there was a club in the EFL who have made a profit. It's not a huge profit, but there's definitely a club in the EFL, and it's definitely a profit.
Hats off to Stevenage, who were called Stevenage Borough, but they're now known as Stevenage Football Club. They're managed by Steve Evans. I wouldn't necessarily take business advice from Steve Evans. He is a character, I think is the place. And if anybody wants to get an insight into his management style, I'd recommend the book Journeyman by, I think it's Ben Smith, who's a player who played for Steve Evans on 3 or 4 occasions. And Steve Evans is one of those people that's good at spotting a half decent footballer. But I'll let you form your own opinions with regards to his skills as a coach overall.
Well, Kieran, I'll tell you what I absolutely endorse your sentiment. I wouldn't take business advice from Steve Evans, nor would I go into a pub car park with him after 11 o'clock at night.
Very wise, very wise. So how have they managed to make £13,000 profit? And that is the number involved. And actually, they're one of the very, very few football clubs that overall have made a profit. It's because they've got a squad which has got a sum cost of 0. They sign academy players, they get free transfers, they've got loans, they do Bosmans. And because they've not got a benefactor as such who's willing to subsidise the losses, they have to have a break-even model. And again, Steve Evans, figure of fun for many. I do like the fact that he once said, "I'm going to become the manager of Leeds," when he was the manager of Rotherham, and if I do get the appointment, I'm going to turn up in a sombrero. And lo and behold, Leeds then appointed him as manager. And he turned up in a sombrero. So, he does have a sense of humour. Yeah. He's never dull. He's not the referee's best friend, but he knows how to operate in that particular market.
It's a remarkable story, Stevenage, because they were a Sunday League team. That's how they started in 1976. And now here they are holding their own in the EFL. It's no secret, Kieran, that I'm the proudest of Londoners. We all know that. We all know that I'd be perfectly happy to turn the M25 into a moat and put portcullises up and have London passports. But if for some reason I was not allowed to live in London, my city of choice would be Edinburgh. I love Edinburgh. So it's with some sadness that I say, for the first time, I believe, we talk about Edinburgh City on the pod. And I say it with some sadness because it's very rarely good news when we mention a club for the first time on the pod.
Yes, Edinburgh City. Did they used to be Meadowbank Thistle? Is it
sort of? Yeah,
I think they played at Meadowbank. Or they used Meadowbank Stadium. Yeah. I must confess, I've not read sort of the transition, if there is one as such. Because Meadowbank were always a very curious club, because I remember when they formed, and I was at the age when I was still reading Shoot and putting my cardboard tables together for the first 6 weeks of the season until we got bored, or you lost some of the cardboard slots from Shoot to put into your table. But Edinburgh City, looking at their accounts, they're technically insolvent. They have now said, we've come to a sort of arrangement with HMRC, which we believe will allow us to continue to trade for the rest of the season. A new owner came in at the start of the season. Like many new owners, underestimated the extent of the task in terms of the break-even of running a football club. They owe money to HMRC, presumably for VAT and for pay-as-you-earn. They've got 40 season ticket holders, which, hats off to all of them, because if there's one thing I can say with a reasonable degree of confidence, I buy a season ticket because I want to be able to sit in the same seat each week, and I get that guaranteed. And also, because the matches are sold out, I'm guaranteed a ticket for every match. I suspect that's not something you'd probably need to worry about. And I'm not being facetious here towards Edinburgh City, because we've always said every fan is equal in terms of their devotion. Their attendance is normally 300 to 400. They've not had a great season, but at least they've got a lifeline. I think there was a genuine chance of the club getting foul of HMRC, and on the back of that, they might have been on the receiving end of a winding up order or worse.
Yeah, actually thinking about it, I'm not entirely clear. I think Edinburgh City are a completely different club to Meadowbank, but I would need to confirm that.
Yeah.
I'm slightly distracted by the 40 season ticket holders. I mean, good luck to every single one of them, because
Absolutely.
I don't care what anybody says.
Yeah.
To those 40 people, that club is as important to them as Palace is to me and Brighton is to you. Not long before Christmas, Kieran, we rather cursorily covered a story about Nuneaton Borough, because it literally broke 5 minutes before we started to record. And we felt that we should cover it, and we did. And we didn't have time to go into as much detail as we wanted to. And it didn't seem at that time as though it's going to develop into such a serious story. But it has, unfortunately. So I think retrospectively, we probably owe, well, I probably owe, because it was me that rushed it through because we had very little detail to talk about. Probably owe an apology to Nuneaton Borough fans for not covering it in the detail that perhaps we should have done. Because, as I say, it has turned into a not good story for a long-established non-league club.
Yes, I can remember them playing at Middlesbrough, taking about 5,000, third round of the FA Cup, and sort of 10 or 15 years ago. And those moments are, we've often said, why is football so popular? Because it combines two of the greatest things in life, which is relationships and memories, and shared memories. So every Nuneaton Borough that went to that match will still be talking about it, and will be saying, "Well, we had a chance. We could have done." So they've had to withdraw from the league. I think they're in the Southern League. All of the first team players have left. They had an eviction letter from somebody a couple of months ago. It looks like they're on the brink of administration, but I'm thinking, well, there's nothing to administer. So, for those hundreds of fans, couple of thousand fans, whatever it's going to be, it's sad. It's very difficult to get airspace, to get an acknowledgement in the in radio and the newspapers and so on, because everybody's fighting for attention, but it doesn't look good at all as to whether we're going to have a Nuneaton Borough. And for those fans that go, it's part of their identity. It's part of their routine. And there are too many of these stories over the course of the last few months. I think things have accelerated in a negative way.
Well, I mean, to illustrate your point about airtime, we started off with a long discussion about how my club are going to raise the money to build a new stand to get an extra 8,000 people in. Well, we don't know the details of the finances at Nuneaton Borough. So if there are any fans or officials of the club who want to get in touch with us, we'd be only too happy to talk to you, to find out what is actually happening and to give you some of that oxygen of publicity that might help.
This episode is brought to you by Tinder. New year, new dating goals. Tinder has you covered this year. They make it easy and fun. And with tons of cool new features, it's the perfect place to set the right vibe. Whether you're looking for real, meaningful connections, an epic romance, or just a fun night out, explore all the possibilities for yourself. Tinder. It starts with a swipe. Download Tinder today.
It's hard not to add a side of hot, crispy hash browns to your favorite McDonald's breakfast. It's even harder not to eat said hash browns before you get home. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Our final story, Kieran, takes us to a global brand. We spoke on the last pod about the Spanish police getting involved in Watford, and now the French police have got involved in, with all due respect to Watford, a bigger club than both them and Nuneaton Borough.
Yes, this is major ooh-la-la territory. It unravels more and more. The French police have raided the French finance ministry. And the reason for this is President Macron is being accused of having too close a relationship with perhaps PSG, who are Qatari owned, and there are relationships between the French government and the Qatari government. And the accusation that's been made is that there has been some form of arrangement which allowed PSG to avoid UEFA charges in respect of financial fair play. There's also accusations of PSG employing, and I quote directly, a dirty tricks unit. Now,
Wow.
In this country, the dirty tricks unit at present is in relation to Ivan Toney and Foamgate. He moved a piece of, and I think it's a work of genius, by the way. But I'm firmly on the Ivan Toney side in terms of what he did last week. But this dirty tricks unit of PSG has been accused of kidnapping, fraud, and blackmail. And then we come to somebody who is never short of a party, is never short of dullness. It's Neymar. And if anybody's ever been to a Neymar party, we'd love to have you on the show just for the sheer intrigue, because I'm sure 99% of what you say could not be actually broadcast. But this goes back to when Neymar was a player for Barcelona. And under Spanish football law, you don't pay a transfer fee as such, but an individual player has a release clause in their contract. And what the player has to do is that the player has to pay the release clause. So in the case of Neymar, he had a €222 million release clause. And instead of that being paid by the player, the accusation, and this is what normally happens, is that he was given €222 million by PSG, and he then used that money to pay his release clause. And if that is the case, his critics in France, and France is quite a high tax regime, said, well, hold on, that £222 million should form part of your remuneration, and therefore you should be being taxed on this. So it's all getting murkier and murkier. And as we've seen in the UK, politicians don't actually deal with the big issues. They're too busy trying to score points in respect of trivialities and so on. So this has now turned to a Macron versus Macron's enemies. The enemies are saying Macron was in cahoots with the Qatari government because he wanted to win some trade deals, and part of the entente there would be, we'll allow PSG, which of course is owned by Qatar, to recruit Neymar, and you'll have Neymar and Messi and Kylian Mbappe, and you'll go on and you'll win the Champions League, and we'll flog you a few aircraft or whatever it is into the bargain as well.
You can't help feeling that if this story was about the British police raiding the Treasury, it would be somebody like Private Godfrey knocking on a door saying, do you have a spreadsheet I could look at, do you think? Whereas in France, it will have involved CS gas, doors being kicked in, proper stuff, which is what I love from. As for Ivan Toney, my son, Ed.
I do.
Very good comedian. Normally only too happy to see anyone stick it to the man. Anyone is only too happy to see anyone give it to authority. I've never seen him so angry about Ivan Toney cheating. He was just furious. And to be fair, one of his best mates is a Forest fan, so he was taking his lead from WhatsApp messages from him. My takeaway from that is, who knew you could lift the bloody foam up? When was that? Since when that's been a thing? It's a spray on a grass. How can you lift it up? What's the point of having it if you can lift it up? That's a design fault that should have been seen through a long time ago. A long time ago, we should be going, why is Eze taking that free kick 3 yards away from the goalkeeper? Well, that's where the line is. I think there's a discussion to be had about the reintroduction of Ivan Toney. There was one photograph in particular of Ivan Toney in his betting company sponsored Brentford shirt, standing in front of a betting company logo. I think they could have been a little less high profile with his reintroduction, to be perfectly honest, but that's a discussion for another pod. Thank you to everyone who's donated to pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod, that'd be very kind of you, and it will get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes, and you can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you want a question you'd like answered on the show, you can email us at questions@priceoffootball.com, and if you want any of our merchandise, t-shirts or books, then just go to priceoffootball.com. And don't forget, there is still time to vote for the Price of Football in this year's Sport Podcast Awards, this year's prestigious Sport Podcast Awards. We're out for the best sports business podcast, and just search, or you can search if you want.
Search.
It'd be probably better if you just searched for Sport Podcast Awards to cast your vote now. We'll also put a link in the show notes. We'll be back on Monday with one of those questions pods. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you to everybody for being in contact. Another benefit of using Patreon is that you can listen to the show advert-free, if that's what you so desire. There's various ways of supporting the show, and one of the ways is to give us a review. It helps us in the charts, it helps us in terms of algorithms and so on. By all accounts, it doesn't matter what you say. So you could even say you would rather have the show presented, and I'm not sure I would tune into this one, by Kate Moss and David Warner, the Australian opening batsman, a man of few words of any sense, but for the sheer weirdness of it, that could be quite a surreal, but I suspect very brief podcast.
Yeah, especially if it was recorded after midnight. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.